Beneath the city of light lies a darkness that no sun has ever reached. Far below the boulevards and market stalls, beyond the metro tunnels and foundations of centuries-old buildings, an empire waits in silence. Its borders are drawn not in ink but in bone. It does not shine or breathe or beckon, but it is there. And it has always been there, stretching beneath Paris, like the memory of something forgotten but not gone. A city beneath a city, built not for the living, but for those who could no longer remain above. It began not as a plan, but as a problem. In the Middle Ages, Paris's cemeteries groaned under the weight of its dead. The Church of the Innocents, less innocence, was the worst offender. Bodies stacked in layers so thick the ground itself heaved. The stench was unholy. The rains brought bones to the surface. Cellars of nearby homes flooded, not with water, but with the liquefied remains of the long interred. The city was rotting from within, and the living could no longer bear the closeness of their dead. The solution, when it came, was not spiritual. It was spatial. Beneath Paris lay the answer quarries, carved out over centuries, the hollow bones of the city itself. Stone had been pulled from the ground to build its churches and palaces, leaving behind a vast network of tunnels, chambers, and shafts. By the late 1700s, these quarries sat largely abandoned, forgotten beneath the growing metropolis. But when the cemeteries threatened to breach the surface, the city turned its gaze downward. What had once given Paris its form would now give it relief. The quarries would become the catacombs. The transfer began quietly at night. In 1786, the first bones were removed from less innocence under the cover of darkness. They were carted across the city, accompanied by cloaked priests reciting prayers for the nameless remains. There was no ceremony, only necessity. The bones were not buried, they were stored, stacked, arranged. The process continued for decades. Cemetery after cemetery was emptied. Millions of bodies, spanning centuries, were moved below. Death became a logistical exercise, a sanitary solution. But something strange happened in the darkness. The catacombs were never intended to be a shrine. And yet, as the bones piled higher, a quiet reverence took shape. Workers began arranging femurs and skulls into patterns, arches, columns, crosses. The remains formed walls of symmetry and symbols. Death, in the hands of the living, was turned into structure, into order, into art. It was grotesque, yes, but also strangely beautiful. A cathedral of the forgotten, sculpted from the very bodies it entombed. By the time the official ossuary was established in 1809, the catacombs had become something else entirely, not just a place to hide the dead, but a place to encounter them, a realm beneath the world where time had no dominion. Here, revolutions and empires meant nothing. Royal bones rested beside paupers, soldiers beside children. Faith did not separate them, nor did language or cause of death. Below the city, all were equal in dust. And yet, despite the symmetry and silence, the catacombs remained alive in their own way. They breathed moisture. They whispered with every footstep. Visitors who descended into the tunnels reported a strange stillness, but also a presence. Something about being surrounded by so much mortality without any particular story attached. The names were gone, the dates erased. What remained was not individual death, but death as a landscape and changing, all-encompassing. Only a small portion of the catacombs is open to the public today. A single corridor, carefully maintained, dimly lit. Tourists file through, shivering, whispering, unsure whether to be reverent or curious. But beyond those marked paths, the catacombs stretch for over 200 miles, most of it unmapped, illegal to enter, and yet some do. The cataphiles, urban explorers of the underworld, know the tunnels intimately. They map them by candlelight. They paint murals in forgotten rooms. They host secret concerts, picnics, moments of stillness beneath a city that never truly stops. What draws them is not thrill alone. It is something older, a need to touch the past, to stand within it. In the catacombs, the weight of time becomes physical. You feel it in your lungs, in the stone, in the dripping air. You feel how close we are to it, all the lives lived, the bodies buried, the silence waiting. Down here, life feels fragile, sacred. Every breath is louder, every heartbeat more pronounced. You remember what you are, temporary. And perhaps that is the truest purpose of the catacombs. Not to horrify, not even to remember, but to remind that above every step we take lies the hush of millions who once stood where we do. That beneath our laughter, our rush, our noise, there is an unbroken silence holding us up. That the city we live in rests not just on stone, but on stories. And in time, we too will be part of that quiet, not lost, just returned. Long before the catacombs became a reliquary of the dead, they were something far more practical, a source of life for the city above. The limestone quarries that snake beneath Paris provided the very bones of the metropolis's cathedrals. Bridges, mansions, and monuments were carved from the pale stone drawn from its own underbelly. Long before Paris had kings or revolutions, it had diggers, generations of them, hacking away at the ground with chisels and torches, blindly shaping the future skyline, one cartload at a time. The Romans were the first to see the value in the earth beneath what would become Paris, Lutetia. Their settlement on the Seine was built from that same stone, quarried just south of the river. They left no catacombs, no bones, but they did leave voids. Over centuries, the quarries expanded like veins, sprawling beneath the land in jagged, irregular patterns. No master plan guided their formation. They followed the stone, carving tunnels wider and deeper with each generation. The earth below Paris became a sponge of air, hollowed and weakened. By the medieval period, the expansion had grown frantic. Paris was a city in bloom, and it needed material to raise itself skyward. The Gothic era demanded not just stone, but specific stone clean, white limestone capable of holding arches aloft and catching the light of stained glass. Quarrymen risked their lives in the darkness, descending into shafts with little more than ropes, oil lamps, and instinct. Many never returned. The city built above did not concern itself with what happened below. It wasn't until buildings began to collapse without warning, without reason, that anyone looked down. In the late 18th century, entire streets gave way to the void beneath them. Cellars dropped into the dark. Houses split open like wounds. What had been hidden for centuries suddenly announced itself in dust and disaster. Paris, it seemed, had dug too deeply into its own future. The quarries that had given it form now threatened to take it back. Panic turned to urgency, and urgency to bureaucracy. The Inspection General Day was created in ETTTA, formal body charged with mapping and reinforcing the labyrinth beneath the capital. Engineers crawled through forgotten shafts, cataloging the tunnels with chalk marks and meticulous sketches. Where stone had been removed, they poured concrete. Where ceilings sagged, they built supports. What had once been wild became documented, stabilized, controlled, at least in theory. And it was this effort, this sudden awareness of the hidden realm beneath Paris, that made the catacombs possible. For the first time, the city understood what it had inherited: a massive, mostly empty network of tunnels winding beneath its feet. It was no longer just a quarry. It was a space, a resource, a solution to problems the surface could no longer contain. The transformation from void to vault had begun, though no one yet knew what it would mean. The earliest bones deposited in the catacombs were not arranged, they were dumped. Workers wheeled carts into the tunnel mouths and simply tipped them over, spilling the remains of thousands into anonymous heaps. There were too many bodies to account for. Most had decayed beyond identification. The bones mingled, stripped of names, families, causes. Paris did not bury its dead with honor, it stored them with urgency. But even in chaos, there was an unspoken reverence. The workers moved slowly. They whispered prayers. They lit candles they did not need. As the quarry system absorbed the bones, it began to change in meaning. What had once been a symbol of construction became a symbol of containment. The same stone that had built Notre Dame and the Louvre now framed the forgotten quarries. Once alive with the sounds of picks and hammers, fell silent. Dust settled on the remains of kings and beggars alike. The tunnels ceased to echo with the promise of growth. They became still, final. But Paris is a city that cannot help but mythologize itself. The catacombs became more than a solution. They became a secret. A rumor passed from mouth to mouth, a place of pilgrimage for those drawn to the morbid, the curious, the profound. People began to sneak in. Candles returned. So did footsteps. So did questions. What was down there? How deep did it go? And more haunting, who, exactly, were the dead? Each of those questions would lead to more tunnels, more maps, more poetry, and more silence. The bones did not answer. They never have, but they waited. And in waiting, they gave the city above something it didn't yet realize it needed: a mirror. One not of glass or water, but of stone and time. A mirror to show that beneath all monuments there is always ruin. And beneath all life there is always the hush. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Paris catacombs had become a project of the state, quietly maintained, rarely discussed, rarely visited. The tunnels still yawned wide beneath the city, but the work of transferring bones had slowed. The largest cemeteries had been emptied. The immediate danger of rot and disease above had subsided. And yet, something had taken root in those tunnels beyond logistics, a presence that felt like permanence. A transformation was beginning, not of function, but of philosophy. The man who would change the meaning of the catacombs was Louis-Étienne de Thury, an inspector of quarries who saw not just decay, but design. To him, the ossuary was not a gravette, was a canvas. Around 1810, he ordered the chaotic piles of bones to be reorganized into walls, patterns, structures. Femurs and tibias were stacked with precise geometry. Skulls were set into rows, sometimes forming crosses, sometimes arranged as wreaths. He introduced plaques engraved with maxims on death, morality, and time. Suddenly, the catacombs were not only functional, they were theatrical. Visitors, once barred, were cautiously allowed in. Not many, not often, but enough for word to spread. The catacombs, once a silent warehouse for the dead, had become a macabre curiosity. They were spoken of in salons and drawing rooms. mentioned in dispatches from artists and scholars. What had been hidden became whispered, then printed, then mapped. It was no longer just a problem solved. It was a space to explore, to interpret, even to admire. Writers were among the first to descend. Romanticism, with its fascination for ruins, death, and the sublime, found fertile ground in these shadowed halls. De Nerval walked among the bones and returned with verses. Charles Nodier hosted literary evenings in the deeper chambers, where candles flickered against skull-lined walls. Some came for metaphor, some for mourning, some for mystery, but all returned changed. The silence was not empty, they said it was full. The arrangement of bones was never random, even if it appeared so. The walls were carefully reinforced. Columns of stacked tibias formed vaults. A central barrel of skulls framed a chamber like a throne room of the forgotten. The floor was cleared of debris. A fountain was built from old masonry, its water cool and metallic. One room was named the Samaritan Fountain. Another was known as the Crypt of the Passion. These were not official names, but they stuck. The catacombs were slowly acquiring a mythology of their own. What began as a civic response to a sanitation crisis was now a cultural artifact. But beneath the aesthetic transformation, the dead remained nameless. The bones belonged to people, millions of them, but no effort was made to mark individual remains. There were no headstones, no prayers left behind, just plaques that read things like, "Stop, here is the empire of the dead." It was not memory, it was abstraction. A city reducing its dead to geometry. And yet, the impact was undeniable. The catacombs taught humility. They placed the visitor face to face with scale of death, of history, of time. The voices of the surface shouting in the markets, arguing in salons meant little in the silence below. Politics ended here. Fashion did not reach this far. Whether you were royal or revolutionary, priest or prisoner, you returned to the same dust, the same stone, the same quiet. There were complaints, of course. Moralists worried about the spectacle of death. Church leaders frowned at the absence of sacrament. Parents warned children not to speak of what lay below. But none of it stopped the visitors. If anything, the secrecy made it more alluring. By mid-century, the catacombs had hosted aristocrats, artists, engineers, and even royalty. King Charles X himself made a descent in 1814, his footsteps careful on the stone, his gaze cautious but respectful. The dead did not protest, they never do. But one wonders, perhaps, what they would have thought, knowing that in death they would become part of a monument built not to glorify their lives, but to demonstrate their end. There is no comfort in the catacombs. Not really, only awe, a quiet kind, the kind that settles on your skin like dust, reminding you that what you are now, warm, breathing, upright will, one day belong to the hush. And so, de Thury's vision lived on, long after his maps faded and his plaques cracked with moisture. The ossuary remained. Bones, once buried in haste and horror, now rested in arrangement more shrine than storage, and the city above, alive and rising, continued to build. Unaware or unwilling to dwell on what it stood upon, a cathedral of mortality, vast and unseen, where the only sermon was silence, and the only choir was made of bones. To descend into the catacombs is to pass through layers of time, not marked by dates, but by air, stone, and silence. The journey begins above ground, in the waking city, the clatter of silverware from sidewalk, the low murmur of conversation, the grinding breath of the metro. And then a narrow staircase, unassuming, almost mundane. It spirals downward through limestone and centuries, coiling like a drill bit into the earth. Each step falls further from the noise, until the world narrows into the scrape of your soles and the hush pressing in from all sides. At the base of the stairs is a corridor, damp, dimly lit. The floor slopes subtly, the air dense with mineral chill. The scent is unmistakable. Earth, age, and something not quite death, but adjacent to it. Visitors often don't speak here, not out of respect, but reflex. Their words feel unwelcome, clumsy in the stillness. The walls breathe cold. The ceiling drips condensation. The hush is total and, yet, somehow, alive. This is not yet the ossuary. This is the threshold. The passages wind and fork, sometimes narrowing to a shoulder's width, sometimes opening into squat chambers, supported by thick pillars of stone. The ceilings are low. You stoop, you shuffle, you adjust your breath. The sound of dripping water becomes a metronome, your heart sensing to it without consent. You are not afraid, exactly, but you are altered. There is no sense of scale, no exit signs, no clocks, only onward. Then the sign appears, carved in stone, arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort. Stop. This is the empire of the dead. It is not a warning, it is a declaration. Beyond this portal, the catacombs begin in earnest. The world you knew, the one with names and jobs and clocks, does not follow. You duck beneath the lintel, you pass the marker, and you arrive in the land where history has been distilled into its final, most honest form, bone. The first sight catches in the throat. Rows of femurs, neatly stacked like firewood, skulls interspersed like ornaments. The symmetry is surreal, almost beautiful. Not gruesome, not yet. The eye struggles to reconcile what it sees: an architecture of death, meticulous and orderly, designed not to terrify, but to contain. This is not a crypt, it is a gallery, a library, where the books are lives, and the shelves are made of time. Some visitors cry, others laugh, too nervously, trying to shake off the heaviness they didn't expect. Guides often say nothing, they don't need to. The bones speak for themselves. No names, no epitaphs, just form tens of thousands of skulls, hollow-eyed and patient. They do not accuse, they do not forgive. They are simply there, watching nothing, witnessing everything. Each corridor leads to another. The bones shift from simple stacks to more elaborate arrangements, columns, altars, even walls shaped into hearts and crosses. The effect is not devotional, but confrontational. You begin to feel the numbers. Each skull once bore a name, a memory, a breath. Multiply that by 6 million. You are not walking through a tomb. You are walking through a reckoning. In some chambers, the arrangement ends. Bones are jumbled, broken, scattered in heaps. Here, the order fails. Here, the catacombs remind you that they are still a grave first, a monument second. You see cracked teeth, shattered ribs, the clean arc of a pelvis half buried in limestone dust. You remember, suddenly, that these are not sculptures, they are people, and that one day your bones, too, might be mistaken for stone. And yet, the experience is not morbid, not really. It is clarifying. Everything extraneous is stripped away. There are no portraits, no distinctions, no possessions. Only what remains when everything else has vanished. A skull has no wealth. A femur holds no ideology. Death does not keep score, it only keeps time. And down here, in the bowels of Paris, the time is endless, measured not in moments, but in erosion. When you finally exit the ossuary, blinking in the light, your limbs will feel heavier, not from fatigue, but from memory. Something clings to youth, the dust, the silence, the knowledge. You step into the same city you left, but you are not the same. You have stood in a place where names do not matter, where death has been shaped into permanence, where the forgotten are kept not in mourning, but in witness, and the threshold you crossed stays with you, long after your footsteps have faded. There is no true silence in the catacombs, though it often feels that way. What you hear instead is the sound of things settling, the slow drip of mineral-rich water onto limestone, the almost imperceptible creak of the earth above shifting in its ancient sleep, the scuff of a boot on centuries-old dust. The echoes are odd here. They do not bounce cleanly as in a cathedral or cave. Instead, they are absorbed, swallowed by the bones and walls, muffled by history. It is a quiet that feels watched. Long ago, when the ossuary was still being assembled, laborers would sometimes hum to themselves as they worked, their voices trailing off into nothing. Some sang prayers, others tavern songs, as they arranged the dead into walls. But over time, the men grew quieter. The bones, it seemed, did not like song. Tools echoed unnaturally. Words returned warped. Eventually, the workers began to speak only in gestures. The catacombs had trained them to be still. There are legends, of course, stories of voices heard in empty tunnels, of names whispered by mouths no longer flesh. Most are the inventions of frightened minds and flickering lanterns, and yet even the most rational visitor feels something here. It's not fear, not entirely, it's presence, as though the walls themselves are listening, as though the quiet is not absence, but attention. You begin to choose your words more carefully, or not at all. Some cataphiles, the illegal explorers who know the tunnels beyond the public routes, claim they can hear the dead, not in speech, but in pressure, in a kind of mental echo that grows stronger the deeper you go. One man, who mapped over 10 kilometers of uncharted tunnel, said the bones gave him directions. Another described standing still for over an hour because the air was thinking. These are not hallucinations, they insist. Just messages from a realm that has no language. And perhaps that's what the catacombs truly are. Not a graveyard, but a vocabulary of silence. Every corridor a sentence, every skull a word unspoken. It is the most articulate stillness in the world, clear, unambiguous, and absolute. Down here, philosophy becomes tangible. You don't contemplate death, you walk through it, you see its scale, you feel its geometry, and in doing so, you begin to understand its grammar. The Romans believed that the dead could not rest if their names were forgotten, but Paris disagreed. Paris stored its dead nameless land, yet they do rest, not peacefully perhaps, but with purpose. Their arrangement is too precise, too deliberate, to suggest abandonment. The catacombs do not mourn, they archive, they preserve, they listen, and so they persist. At times, the silence feels almost musical. There is rhythm in the repetition of bones, harmony in the curves of the chambers. Some visitors have reported hearing faint chords, impossible melodies, as though the tunnels themselves are tuned to some otherworldly scale. Scientists chalk this up to auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns in noise. But others aren't so sure. The catacombs are full of echoes. Some of them may be older than language. One story, told by a guide who's walked the tunnels for decades, describes a woman who fainted near the crypt of the Passion. When she awoke, she was smiling. They were singing, she said. I couldn't understand the words, but I knew them. The guide never found anyone else nearby. He now walks more softly in that section. He does not speak there, he listens. This, then, is the sound of stone, not silent, but ancient, not quiet, but concentrated. It does not ask to be filled, it asks to be joined. To walk in the catacombs is to tune yourself to another frequency, one deeper than music, deeper than thought. And once you've heard it, truly heard it, the world above will never sound the same again. It will seem too fast, too loud, too thin, because you will know what the hush beneath it carries, and you will long for it. Mapping the catacombs is an act of defiance, not against nature, but against forgetting. The tunnels beneath Paris stretch for more than 200 miles, many of them unmapped, unlit, and unstable. To attempt to chart them is to step willingly into uncertainty, to turn one's back on order and enter a domain where the rules of space bend. And yet, for over 2 centuries, people have tried. They have drawn lines on parchment, etched notations on damp stone, carried compasses through air so thick with silence it could be mistaken for water. The earliest maps were pragmatic, created by quarry inspectors in the late 18th century. Their job was not romance, it was survival. Buildings were collapsing above due to the unrecorded voids below. So men with oil lamps and surveyors' tools descended, recording shafts and galleries, marking zones that needed reinforcement. Their lines were crude, their angles off. They worked quickly, often with fear. Many passages were deemed too dangerous to enter. Others simply disappeared, swallowed by time or water. No map was ever complete. Later came the enthusiasts. In the 19th century, as the catacombs grew in mystique, amateur cartographers, many of them students or artists, began making their own maps, some beautiful in their precision. These were not just tools, they were invitations, intricately labeled, color-coded, filled with poetic chamber names like Hall of the Lost, Cathedral of Bones, or the Sea of Skulls. Most of these maps were secret, passed hand to hand, kept folded in coat linings, or sewn into bags. To possess one was to hold a key to a forbidden world. The cataphiles of the late 20th century inherited this tradition. These urban explorers, obsessed with the forbidden labyrinth below their feet, took mapping to a new level. Armed with flashlights, chalk, and film cameras, they crawled through flooded galleries, scaled crumbling shafts, and slept in the dust beside the dead. They mapped with obsessive care, noting distances by footsteps, measuring chamber height with string and estimation. Their maps were works of passion, hand-drawn, corrected again and again, kept alive by use rather than publication. Some of the most famous modern maps were created by a group known as the UX, a secretive collective that operated beneath Paris in the 1990s and 2000s. They did more than explore, they repaired, curated, and even created. They restored a neglected clock built an underground cinema in a hidden chamber, and left behind maps so detailed and accurate that even city authorities eventually acknowledged their value. They called themselves caretakers, curators of the forgotten. But mapping the catacombs is not merely a physical task, it is also philosophical. To chart a place where death lives is to confront what cannot be truly known. Tunnels collapse, walls shift, bones dislodge. The catacombs breathe and evolve. A map, no matter how meticulous, is only a snapshot of a moment that is already gone. Cartographers must accept that their work will decay, that certainty is illusion, and still they draw, still they record, because in the act of mapping, they honor the space. One of the challenges in mapping the catacombs is orientation. GPS does not work underground. Compasses are unreliable due to the mineral content of the stone. Sound is distorted. Landmarks are few and mutable. Navigation relies on memory, intuition, and faith. Many tunnels loop or fork without warning. Some lead to dead ends, others descend into water. Some were walled off decades ago, only to be reopened by unseen hands. There is no grid, only whispers of structure. Cataphiles leave marks to help others chalk arrows, cryptic symbols, colored stones. But these are not always trustworthy. Some are traps left for rivals. Others are messages only understood by those initiated into the deeper lore. There is an entire language in the catacombs, known only to those who spend enough time within its lungs. It is not spoken, it is left behind. A boot print in dust, a candle stub, a skull turned just so. And what drives them, these cartographers of darkness? Why risk collapse, fines, even death, to walk the same paths again and again, sketching by lamplight? Perhaps it is control. To draw a map is to tame a thing. Perhaps it is communion. To know the catacombs deeply is to be changed by them. Or perhaps it is simply reverence, a belief that some places should not be forgotten, that silence too deserves memory, and that to leave no record is to let the past die a second time. In the end, every map of the catacombs is a love letter, in ink and patience, addressed to a place that does not need it, but accepts it all the same. The tunnels cannot speak, but they let themselves be known. And those who map them walk a thin line between explorer and witness, between above and below, between memory and erasure. They draw not just lines, but elegies, not just shapes, but shadows. And the catacombs, in their infinite hush, remember them. To touch the dead is to cross a threshold most never dare approach. And yet, for decades, the workers tasked with arranging the bones in the Paris catacombs did exactly that day after day, year after year. They moved femurs like firewood, stacked skulls with precision, and handled the remnants of millions with a familiarity that seems almost unthinkable. They were not priests, nor artists, nor mourners. They were laborers. But what they built was something no cathedral could rival. An ossuary so vast, so meticulous, that it reshaped how death was seen. They were known simply as les fossoyeurs, the grave diggers. Most had come from the cemeteries above, where they once lowered caskets into overcrowded plots, or cleared away the remains of graves too old or too shallow. But in the catacombs, their role changed. There was no soil here, no shovels, only limestone and bone, and a task without end. They were given candles, carts, gloves, and above all else time, so much time, more than any one man could complete in a lifetime. The bones arrived in waves. Every night, carts rolled through the city's streets, veiled in black cloth and accompanied by slow-moving processions. Some bore the last rites, others came in silence. The dead were dumped at designated access points, mouths of quarries that had once been used to mine stone, now repurposed as gateways to memory. The workers waited below, ready to receive. There were no ceremonies, only echoes. In the early years, the bones were jumbled-tipped in piles, sorted loosely by size or type. But soon, a system emerged. The long bones femurs, tibias formed the structural core of each wall. Skulls were inserted as accents, their hollow faces gazing outward like sentinels. Shorter bones phalanges, vertebrae were often gathered and buried behind the visible walls, hidden in mass heaps called bone backfill. What was seen was only a fraction of what lay behind. It was hard work. The tunnels were cold and humid. The walls dripped. The lamps smoked. The air was thick with dust and decay. Workers developed strange coughs, infections, burns from the chemicals used to preserve what little order could be maintained. They wore simple coats, sometimes scarves, tied over their mouths. There were no masks, no safety protocols, only routine. And yet they did not complain, not often. Many believed they were part of something sacred-if not religious, then eternal. Some left their names behind, carved into the stone, hidden among the bones, scratched into plaques, long since weathered. Not signatures of vanity, but of testimony. I was here. I moved the dead. I gave them order. A few even arranged their initials in skulls, quiet monograms in a language only the catacombs understand. We do not know their stories, only that they chose or were chosen to labor in the shadows for the sake of the surface above. It was not always solemn. There are accounts of workers telling jokes, humming to themselves, even sharing bread and wine in the deepest corridors. In the presence of so much death, life becomes a kind of resistance. They carved benches from the stone, etched graffiti into the walls. One worker created a small niche filled with carvings of birds. Another, more daring, shaped a miniature altar from discarded bones. These were not decorations. They were moments of self-preservation, acts of beauty in a kingdom of silence. And they were not forgotten. Even as the catacombs became a curiosity for the elite, the laborers remained below, preserving the structure, shoring up weak walls, redirecting dripping water into carved basins. They became stewards of the dead. When noblemen visited, they kept to the shadows. When poets came, they paused their work. Their reverence was quiet, steady, grounded in touch and repetition. They did not romanticize death, they managed it. Today, tourists walk past the walls they built, marveling at the symmetry, the patience, the sheer scale of it all. But they rarely ask who placed each bone, who aligned each row, who labored by candlelight with dust in their lungs and the sound of dripping stone in their ears. The catacombs are a monument, not just to the dead, but to those who tended to them, those who transformed wrought into pattern, chaos into geometry, memory into stone. The official catacombs of Paris are a fraction of the whole. Tourists descend through a narrow staircase, walk a prescribed path of less than 2 kilometers, and exit back into the city. The bones they see neatly arranged, dimly latar curated, framed, safe. But beyond the gate, marked no entry, past the iron barriers and warning signs, lies a far older, wilder realm. Unmarked corridors twist in darkness for hundreds of miles, and though entry is forbidden, people go anyway. These are the illegal pilgrims. To become a cataphile is not simply to trespass. It is to commit oneself to the underworld, not with arrogance, but with devotion. These are not casual explorers or thrill seekers. Most spend years studying maps, learning the maze, respecting its dangers. They enter at night through storm drains, metro vents, forgotten cellar doors. They bring candles, chalk, ropes, radios, boots, wrapped in plastic. They carry everything they need to survive hours or dies in a realm that does not welcome the unprepared. The experience is disorienting from the start. The tunnels twist like intestines, their dimensions narrowing without warning. Some passages require crawling on hands and knees, belly pressed to stone. Others flood with water so cold it burns. The air is heavy with damp, laced with the mineral breath of the earth. There is no light but what you bring, no rescue if you lose your way. And still they go. In the heart of this darkness, far from the ossuary known to tourists, lies a secret Paris. Rooms covered in murals, chambers where poetry is scrawled in wax and soot, hidden theaters with screens and chairs carved from stone. One hall contains a full dining table where cataphiles gather to share wine and stories. Another, the beach, is filled with sand, carted in bucket by bucket. These are not acts of vandalism. They are offerings, shrines to silence. The city beneath the city. The cataphile community is bound by trust, secrecy, and tradition. Newcomers called tourists, even among the trespassers, are watched carefully. You earn your place not by how far you go, but by how well you listen to the tunnels, to those who know them, to your own heartbeat. A true cataphile carries no map, only memory. Every turn, every wall, every dripping echo is recorded in the mind, becoming part of a personal topography deeper than any official chart. Some groups form tight circles, exploring together for years. Others prefer solitude. There are painters, musicians, sculptors, all drawn to the underground not for spectacle, but for clarity. Down there, everything unnecessary falls away. One cataphile once wrote, "There is no money, no clocks, just time and stone and breath." It is not an escape. It is a return to something older than history, deeper than identity. But not all stories end well. People have gotten lost, some for hours, a few for days. The most famous case was in the 1990s. A man found wandering, disoriented, unable to speak. His flashlight had died. He had run out of food. He survived only by drinking condensation from the walls. Others have not been so lucky. There are rumors, rare but persistent bodies found weeks later, curled in dry corridors, fingers worn to bone from scratching at the stone. The catacombs do not forgive carelessness. Police occasionally patrol known access points. Some fines are issued, entrances are sealed, only to be reopened weeks later by unseen hands. The city cannot truly police its underworld. There are too many ways in, too many places where Paris has forgotten itself. The cataphiles know this. They walk in the seams between oversight and oblivion. Their crime is not violence, but intimacy with the forbidden, the forgotten, the dead. To those above, they are outlaws. To those below, they are pilgrims. They do not disturb the bones. They do not steal or desecrate. They light candles. They clean. They remember. They move quietly through the empire of the dead, not as intruders, but as caretakers. And when they leave, it is always with reverence. They touch the stones as one might touch the edge of a dream, and whisper thanks into the silence. Art is not the first thing one expects to find deep beneath the streets of Paris. And yet, in the forbidden zones of the catacombs far from the sanctioned ossuary and the tidy galleries of bones, there are paintings, graffiti, sculptures, icons, all created in silence, by candlelight, for no audience but the dust and the darkness. These works do not sign themselves. They do not ask for praise. They simply exist, glowing faintly on damp stone, testament to a need older than law, the need to leave a mark, Some of the murals are simples, spray-painted skulls, cryptic symbols, arrows pointing toward known exits. Others are vast. There is a full depiction of Dante's descent into the Inferno, rendered in shades of rust and ash. There is a portrait of a cataphile lost in 1983, his features abstracted into shadow and flame. There are scenes of Paris inverted, the Eiffel Tower dripping toward the earth like a stalactite. These are not jokes, they are meditations, memories painted in places no sunlight has ever touched. The walls absorb pigment like skin. Reds bleed, blues blur into black. Over time, water leaches through the limestone, creating veins and blooms that distort the original images, turning them into something new. A mural rarely lasts more than a decade in its original form. The catacombs edit what they are given. Every artist must accept this. What they create is not preserved, only witnessed full. They are lucky for a moment. Sculptors work with what they find. Some carve faces into the raw stone, smooth and eerie, peering out from alcoves as if frozen mid-breath. Others stack bones into structures, chairs, even shrines before collapsing them again, so that nothing becomes permanent. There are altars made of broken metro tiles, a miniature guillotine built from scrap iron, a stone angel whose wings are formed from collapsed ceiling fragments. Art as ritual, art as offering. The cataphiles do not sign their names, not truly. At most, a pseudonym, a symbol, a date, a cryptic phrase in Latin or Greek. Pulvis et umbra sumus, says one. We are dust and shadow. These are not declarations of ego. They are acknowledgments of mortality. In a world where every surface is laced with death, the impulse to create becomes an act of defiance. Or maybe not defiance, maybe dialogue. A way to speak to the silence and know that for a time it speaks back. There are entire chambers known only for their art, the Chapel of Teeth, so named for its grim mosaic made entirely of molars. The Cinema Room, built by the Urban Experiment Collective, complete with a screen and tiered seating. The Room of Echoes, where one wall is covered in a spiral of mirrors, reflecting candlelight into a soft vortex. No ticket stubs, no announcements. These installations appear and vanish, created and destroyed by people who seek neither fame nor legacy, but experience. And yet, above ground, their existence shapes myth. Tourists whisper about the underground artists of Paris. Books hint at their identities. But the truth is that most will never know who created what or when. The catacombs offer no provenance, no catalog, no curation. The art lives briefly and dies completely. The only museum is memory. The only gallery is time. Sometimes, authorities discover these spaces and seal them. Walls are bricked over, tunnels collapsed, but the cataphiles find new routes. The art returns, altered. A painting reappears with its colors reversed. A sculpture is rebuilt using bone instead of brick. The catacombs cannot be sanitized. They absorb every attempt to control them and respond with transformation. Art does not ask permission. Down here, it is inevitable. In a world obsessed with permanence and validation, the murals of the catacombs remind us of something else. That expression can be private, sacred, fleeting. That not all creation needs witness. Some of it is for the stone, the bones, the dark. Some of it is for the artist alone. And some of it is for those few who find it by accident or intent deep beneath the city. In a place where death waits not with cruelty, but with patience. a place where even silence dreams in color. The city above and the tunnels below have always existed in uneasy partnership. Paris stands proudly its wide boulevards, its Haussmannian elegance, its towering monuments rarely betraying what lies beneath. But there have been moments when that partnership has failed, moments when the catacombs reminded the living that they are not the only ones with claims to the land, moments when Paris collapsed, not metaphorically, but literally into the arms of its own forgotten underworld. The most famous collapse happened on April 17, 1774, along the Rue d'Enferhel Street. Without warning, a section of the road gave way, swallowing homes, shops, and entire families into a yawning hole nearly 30 feet deep. The earth had simply vanished, crumbled beneath centuries of pressure and neglect. A few survived, but many did not. The ground had opened like a mouth, and what it devoured was never truly returned. It was this disaster, more than any philosophical debate or health concern, that forced the authorities to confront what lay beneath their feet. In the wake of the Rue d'Enfer collapse, officials established the Inspection Generale Day, their task to explore, map, and stabilize the subterranean landscape. They moved slowly, cautiously. No one knew just how vast the quarry system truly was. Engineers crawled through centuries-old tunnels, scraping moss from inscriptions, marking weak walls, building support columns. They named passageways after the streets above, creating a mirrored Paris beneath the real one. But even as they shored up one section, another threatened to fall. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, collapses continued. A bakery in the Latin Quarter vanished overnight. A convent tilted sideways and sank 3 feet in a single morning. Entire neighborhoods developed fissures that split pavements, cracked fountains, and warped building foundations. And though many were patched and repaired, the memory lingered. The city had grown arrogant, building upward without tending to the hollowness beneath. The nature of the threat was difficult to communicate. These were not earthquakes or floods. They were failures of memory, consequences of forgotten quarries, abandoned tunnels, unstable fills. The catacombs did not rage, they waited. And then, when the weight above became too much, they took what was owed. A floor here, a wall there, a life. The authorities responded with a kind of quiet desperation. Tunnels were filled with cement, access points sealed. A massive program of subterranean reinforcement began, with columns installed like teeth, pushing upward to brace the world above. Today, thousands of these pillars still stand, most never seen. They hold up apartment buildings, roads, even schools, silent, unthanked sentinels of stability. But the threat has never fully disappeared. In 1961, part of a parking garage collapsed near Place d'Enfer, revealing a chamber of bones not seen for over a century. In 2007, a section of road near the 14th arrondissement buckled under a water main break, nearly exposing a long-sealed tunnel. The line between safety and collapse remains thin, constantly negotiated by engineers, constantly tested by time. Some say the catacombs are patient, others say they are resentful. Either way, they are not passive. They shift, they settle, they remember. Beneath the bustle of and crowds, the stone breathes quietly, slowly, but with intent. The city above builds in ambition. The city below waits in endurance. The relationship is not war, it is gravity. And perhaps, in some strange way, this balance is what gives Paris its character, a city both luminous and fragile, both proud and haunted, its beauty sharpened by its risk. For every monument, there is a tunnel. For every celebration, a silence. And for every step taken on its streets, a shadow stirs beneath. This is Paris in full. Not just what is seen, but what lies underneath. Not just what stands, but what might one day fall. It is easy to imagine the catacombs as static, but that illusion vanishes the longer you stay. The catacombs are not frozen. They are not even still. They shift, they sweat, they breathe, they rot. Time does not pass through them quietly. It accumulates, clings to surfaces, thickens in corners, and in this subterranean empire, time becomes something you can touch. It settles on everything in the form of dust. Not the dust of attics or roads. This dust is older, heavier. It rises from the walls, the bones, the slow disintegration of the stone itself. It floats in beams of flashlight, like the ashes of forgotten candles. It settles on shoulders and lashes and lips. You wipe it away, and it returns. Down here, it is the closest thing to snow delicate, colorless, inevitable. And just like snow, it changes what it covers. It softens, it erases, it hides the sharpness of decay under a uniform layer of forgetfulness. Every step stirs it, every breath takes it in. Guides warn visitors not to linger too long, not to sit on the bone-lined benches or lean against the walls. But for cataphiles, it's a part of the experience. They speak of the dust with reverence. They say it carries memory, that it's made not just of stone, but of people, skin cells, hair, fragments of clothing, coffins, rot, the residue of millions, reduced by time into a weightless veil. You breathe it, you carry it, and it carries you. In certain chambers, the dust is so thick, it coats the floor like velvet. A misstep there can send it swirling into clouds that linger for hours. Some of these rooms are sealed off, not by law, but by respect. One, nicknamed La Salle des Silences, is rumored to contain the remains of bones, too delicate to stack fragments of children, infants, the elderly. No murals there, no candles, just dust, ankle-deep, muffling every footfall. It is said that time moves differently there, slower, more deliberate. Scientists have tried to measure the rate of decay in the catacombs. Some estimate that the oldest bones, exposed for centuries, will eventually crumble into dust themselves. Already, many skulls have collapsed inward, their faces caved and unreadable. The long bones chip at the ends. The finer ones' clavicles, fingers, are gone entirely. The ossuary is not eternal. It is dissolving, slowly, yes, but undeniably. What was once a monument to death is, itself, dying. And yet, this erosion does not feel like loss. Not entirely. It feels like return. The catacombs were once quarries. They were carved from the earth. They gave stone to the city above. Now they take it back, slowly reclaiming form, transforming monuments into sediment, into powder, into absence. Dust to dust is not a metaphor here. It is an observable fact, a law written in the walls. Some cataphiles leave messages in the dust, not written traced. A finger dragged along a skull, a spiral carved into the grime of a wall. They do not last. A breath is enough to blur them, but they are left nonetheless, like whispered thoughts, like echoes that want to linger just a moment more. Some have found entire trails of these markings, leading from one chamber to another. No one knows who left them. Perhaps they were never meant to be followed. Above ground, dust is a nuisance. We sweep it, hide it, pretend it has no origin. But below, in the catacombs, it is honored. It is recognized for what it is, evidence of presence, of passing, of the slow, beautiful ruin that claims all things. The empire of the dead is, in truth, an empire of dust formed, not in violence, but in time. And in that time, everything becomes equal. Everything settles. So when you leave the catacombs and find that your shoes are coated, your coat dimmed, your hands dry with the residue of ages, do not brush it off too quickly. It is not dirt, it is the city, it is memory, it is a reminder, clinging close, that all things fall, and in falling return, and that the catacombs, for all their death, are never done gathering. Not everyone buried in the catacombs arrived with ceremony. Many were nameless, even in life paupers, prisoners, the unclaimed. Others were swept up in events too vast to allow for dignity. Epidemics, wars, revolutions. Their bones rest alongside merchants, bakers, priests, lovers. The arrangement of the catacombs erases hierarchy. In death, they all became stone. But the story of the forgotten dead begins long before they were stacked into symmetry. It begins in the margins. Paris has always drawn people seeking work, safety, escape. In the centuries before the catacombs, the city's cemeteries were overwhelmed. The poor were buried in shallow graves, often in mass pits. The largest, the Day Innocents, was once the resting place for over 2 million souls. During storms, bones would rise to the surface. Children played among them. Butchers found bits of femurs in the market gutters. Death had no privacy, and the poor, especially, had none. When the cemeteries were finally emptied, no distinction was made between bones. They were exhumed by the cartload, tumbled into sacks, carted through the night. Workers dumped them into the catacombs without inventory, without record. Whole families reduced to weight, skulls without names, limbs that would never again be joined. It was a sanitation effort, not an act of mourning. The forgotten dead were not given eulogies. They were simply moved from one silence to another. And yet, traces of them remain not in inscriptions, but in the oddities. A child's jaw nestled between 2 adult skulls. A pelvis cracked clean through, suggesting violence. Skulls with filed teeth, perhaps from distant colonies. Bones with signs of malnutrition, rickets, old injuries. These fragments speak where words never did. They tell of labor, of hunger, of pain endured quietly. These were lives not recorded in ledgers or monuments. Only the bones remember. Some sections of the catacombs are believed to contain plague victims, though this is debated. The Black Death ravaged Paris in waves, and the cemeteries were not equipped to handle the scale. Corpses were stacked like timber. Some say their bones were moved without ever being properly buried. Others claim these victims were buried elsewhere, outside the city walls. But the catacombs hold secrets, and the line between legend and truth is often blurred in darkness. There are also revolutionaries, among the dead those executed during the Reign of Terror, victims of the guillotine. Some were aristocrats, others were commoners caught in the machinery of history. They too were buried without ceremony. The catacombs do not distinguish between sides. Whether you cheered the revolution or feared it, your skull now rests in the same gallery, your silence just as complete. Now and then, an artifact is found wedged between bones, a button, a rosary, a fragment of cloth. Rarely are they removed. They are left in place, protected by dust and darkness. These are the only markers the forgotten dead possess. Not names, but gestures. not tombstones, but echoes. Enough to say, someone was here, someone mattered, even if no one remembered them. Visitors sometimes ask why there are no names in the catacombs, why no plaques for each soul. The answer is simple. No one knew who they were. Record keeping was poor. Many were never documented. Others were lost to fire, flood, or revolution. The ossuary is not a cemetery. It is a mass memory. And like memory, it forgets most things. But perhaps that is the gift of the catacombs. It gives dignity to the nameless, not through recognition, but through equality. No one here is greater than another. All are part of the same architecture. The poor lie shoulder to shoulder with the powerful. The obscure are given as much space as the famous. In death, they are all preserved, not remembered as individuals, but honored as a multitude. And when you walk those halls, when your footfalls echo past the stacked remains of the forgotten, you carry something they never had in life. Witness, you see them, however briefly. You breathe the same air. You remember, even if only for a moment. And in that moment, the forgotten are forgotten no more. Before the tourists, before the warning signs, before the catacombs became a spectacle, there were the processions. These were not public events. No posters were printed. No trumpets blared. They took place in the dark, in the damp, at the hours when even the city above had quieted. Torchbearers led the way, their flames flickering against damp limestone. Behind them came the bodies silent, shrouded, stacked in carts like parcels of fate. And behind the carts came the priests, the workers, and sometimes no one at all. The processions began shortly after 1786, when the city officially began transferring its dead into the catacombs. It was a matter of hygiene, of space, of necessity. But those first nights bore an eerie solemnity. The carts rolled under cover of dusk, wrapped in black cloth, accompanied by clergy chanting the office of the dead. The wheels clattered over cobblestone, each revolution pulling the past toward a deeper silence. At times, entire streets were cleared. At others, the dead rolled unseen. Parisians watched from behind shutters. Some made the sign of the cross. Others whispered prayers or old superstitions. The dead were not feared, but their movement was uncanny, a visible reminder that the city was outgrowing itself. Death had spilled into the streets. Now it was being packed away, like old furniture in a flooded house. But the ritual gave it gravity. Each procession a brief act of reverence, trying to preserve dignity even in efficiency. Not all the dead arrived cloaked. During peak transfer years, the volume overwhelmed the ceremony. Some bodies came half-exhumed, bones tangled with remnants of cloth, strands of hair clinging to scalp. Workers wore scarves over their mouths. Lime was sprinkled over the carts, but the candlelight never dimmed. The flames flickered over skulls and femurs, casting long shadows that danced against alley walls, as if the dead themselves marched in procession. In time, the processions grew quieter. The clergy stopped attending. The carts rolled alone. The city grew used to the routine. By the early 1800s, the transfers were mechanical, stripped of pageantry. The dead were no longer guided. They were deposited. Bones were offloaded at quarry mouths, left in mounds to be sorted later. The flicker of candles gave way to the smoke of lanterns. The songs of mourning gave way to silence. Only the wheels still turned, and yet the memory lingered. Older cataphiles speak of feeling its some subtle energy, that clings to the corridors closest to the old entrances. They call them the veins, and claim that walking them alone at night brings strange dreams, not nightmares, but vivid impressions of footsteps, of torchlight, of chanting far away. The procession, it seems, was not entirely mortal. It left something behind. A few records survive in dusty archives. The names of priests who officiated, the schedules of cemetery clearings, the accounts of neighbors who claimed their cats howled on procession nights. One letter, dated 1792, describes a child who woke every night the carts passed by, insisting he saw people made of smoke walking behind them. His parents moved soon after, whether from fear or from grief, the records do not say. Modern reenactments have been proposed, but none permitted. The city prefers not to blur the line between history and theater. To recreate the processions would be, perhaps, to diminish them. The catacombs, remember, that is enough. Still, some say, if you walk near the old cart routes at Duskru de la Tombazur, place Denford Trosharoyu, can feel the street lean just slightly, as if it remembers the weight. And in the catacombs themselves, far below, there are sections where the air seems thicker, the dust more restless, the silence strangely rhythmic. These are the places the processions reached last, where the dead were left not in pattern, but in heaps, where the last candle burned low, where the procession ended, and permanence began. Long before the cataphiles, before the tourists with flashlights, or the inspectors with clipboards, there were others who walked these halls with purpose, quietly, secretly, secret societies, cults, clubs, conspirators, and seekers of truths, too strange for daylight. The catacombs, with their hidden passages and whispering walls, offered not just shelter from the eyes of the world, but a kind of initiation into darkness, into ritual, into a deeper understanding of what lies beyond death. One of the earliest groups rumored to use the catacombs was the Hellfire Society of Paris, said to have descended from similar libertine clubs in England. They met at night in carved-out chambers, bringing with them wine, poetry, and heresy. Candles were arranged in pentagrams, skulls were placed on stone altars, not for devil worship at least, not in the theatrical sense, but for provocation, for philosophy. They believed that only in confronting death directly could one understand the true nature of life. The bones were not macabre to them, they were mirrors. In the 19th century, stories emerged of underground Masonic lodges meeting by lamplight, their symbols etched into walls long since eroded. They recited oaths while standing atop ossuary stones. Some claimed they had discovered a tomb deeper than any other hidden behind a sealed passage where a skeleton in a robe of gold sat on a throne carved from a single block of limestone. Of course, no one ever found it again, but the legend clung to the walls like soot. During the occupation of Paris in World War II, resistance groups used the catacombs to move unseen beneath the German-controlled city. Messages passed hand to hand. Arms caches were hidden behind false ossuary walls. Meetings were held in candlelit silence. To enter the tunnels was to risk everything. But the catacombs offered sanctuary. The enemy above had tanks and checkpoints. Below, there was only stone and shadow and the courage of those who knew how to walk it. Even the Nazis themselves took interest. The German military established bunkers in parts of the catacombs, reinforcing chambers, installing steel doors, wiring for electricity. Some of these rooms still exist, now abandoned and rusting. Graffiti from German soldiers can still be found, scratched into stone. But the secret societies didn't vanish with the war, they adapted. Their purpose changed, but their hunger for the hidden remained. In the 1960s and 70s, counterculture groups descended below to escape the conformity of the surface world. They brought guitars, incense, typewriters. Some read from banned books. Others practiced occult rituals under the skull-lined arches. The catacombs became a sanctuary for the rejected, the curious, the visionary. Here, in the empire of the dead, they felt freer than in any cafe or lecture hall. The urban experiment, or UX, emerged in the 1980s and took this tradition into a new realm. They were not a cult, but a collective of artists, engineers, architects, and rogue historians. They restored forgotten chambers, built a cinema, hosted secret banquets, installed a bar in a chamber lined with bones. They did it not for fame, but for preservation, for beauty, and all of it in secret. Even the police did not know of their activities until years later, when they stumbled upon the cinema. By then, the UX had vanished. There are darker rumors, too. Tales of rituals performed under new moons, of bones rearranged into symbols only seen from above, of masked gatherings captured in blurry photographs that surfaced briefly before disappearing. These may be fabrications, or they may be warnings stories told to keep outsiders away. After all, the catacombs are not neutral. They respond to intention, and those who enter with darkness in their hearts may find it echoed back more powerfully than they expected. Today, the societies remain hidden. If they exist, they leave little trace. A circle of extinguished candles, a sigil chalked high on a vaulted wall, a section of bone wall subtly rearranged. The catacombs offer them what they have always craved: silence, mystery, and space to explore the limits of belief. They ask no permission, they seek no audience. The catacombs are their cathedral, their library, their crucible. And for those who stumble upon them, an echo of footsteps, a candle still warm, a breath of incense in a sealed roomlet is a reminder that beneath Paris, in the stillness of the bones, the old ways are not gone. They have simply gone deeper. The catacombs do not hunt, they do not lure, they do not beckon with malevolence, but they wait, and they are patient. Over the centuries, people have gone missing within the tunnels, not dozens, but not just a few either. Some were careless, others were curious. A handful were searching for something. A smaller handful never returned. The catacombs do not consume, they absorb, and those they keep are rarely found whole. The most famous case is that of Philibert Aspert, a doorkeeper at the Val de Grace Hospital, who entered the catacombs in 1793 through an unauthorized entrance, carrying only a single candle. He never emerged. 11 years later, his body was found not far from an exit, but too far to reach without light. His keyring still dangled from his belt. His bones were laid to rest where they were found, and a plaque now marks the spot. The lesson, unspoken but understood: the catacombs do not forgive the unprepared. Others have vanished under more mysterious circumstances. In the 1990s, a camcorder was discovered deep in a restricted area, its battery long dead. The footage, when recovered, showed a man exploring alone. At first, he seemed confident, narrating his journey. But as the minutes passed, the footage grew erratic, his breathing louder, his steps frantic, his light flickering. At the end, he dropped the camera and ran. He was never identified. His body has never been found. Some believe it was a hoax. Others are not so sure. The truth is, Getting lost in the catacombs is dangerously easy. Many tunnels loop or dead-end. Others have been sealed or collapsed without warning. Water seeps in from forgotten aqueducts, erasing footprints, soaking maps. Chalk marks fade, batteries die, and in the perfect darkness, sound becomes unreliable. A voice shouted 20 feet away might sound like it's coming from behind you. Fear makes every tunnel look the same. Cataphiles speak of a feeling, the pull. It starts as disorientation, then doubt, then something quieter, deeper, a sense that you're being drawn further in, away from the known paths, not by a presence, but by the tunnels themselves, as if the stone wants to keep you. They call it the long dark. No one who's felt it ever forgets it. Those who don't turn back usually aren't seen again. There are entire chambers dedicated to the missing, not official ones, but shrines, candles left burning, messages scrawled in dust. Pour Soquini, Sant Pa Revenis, for those who did not return. Sometimes these messages appear in places only experienced cataphiles can reach. No one admits to writing them. They just appear, like breath on a mirror, like a whisper too soft to follow. And yet, most of the missing do not become legends. They become rumors. A student who vanished in the 1970s, last seen descending a construction shaft with friends. A tourist who slipped away from a group and was never recovered. A vagrant who sought shelter during a winter storm and was found months later, curled beside a pile of bones. Their stories flicker at the edges of the catacombs' long memory, too brief to carve, too haunting to forget. Authorities deny that the catacombs are dangerous. Official tours are closely monitored. Unauthorized entrances are sealed regularly. But every few years, someone finds a new way in. And every few years, someone goes too far. And when they do, the catacombs waited with malice, but with certainty. They have room. They have time. For those who return, the experience leaves a mark, a deeper respect, a quieter footstep, a decision to never go alone again, and a memory they carry always, that somewhere down a tunnel not yet collapsed, the missing ones remain, not crying for help, not trying to escape, just there, part of the silence, one more echo among many. The walls of the catacombs are not dead. They are limestone, porous, ancient, alive in the slowest, deepest sense. They drip, they swell, they crack and shift, sighing with moisture drawn from centuries of rain and sewage and tears. Those who spend enough time below begin to feel it, the breathing, not literal, but rhythmic, a pressure in the ears, a pulse in the rock. The catacombs, some say, are not static halls. They are a body, a city's buried lung, always inhaling the weight of memory, always exhaling silence. Limestone, once quarried for the city's rise, is fragile by nature. It absorbs water, warps in heat, crumbles under weight. Entire sections of the tunnels are shaped by this slow erosion, arches bowed inward, pillars thick with condensation, floors turned slick by constant seepage. In the wettest seasons, pools form unexpectedly, transforming known routes into mirrored traps. Reflections in the black water trick even seasoned explorers, leading them in circles. The cataphiles call these the drowned paths. Some whisper that once you step into them, the walls no longer align. And there's the sound, always the sound, not noise sound, drips echoing like clocks, stone groaning like old wood, the distant rush of unseen water. In the most isolated sections, the silence becomes oppressive, thick. And then, just as you start to forget what a world with sound feels like, a sudden creak, a shift of pressure, a pop in your ears, and you realize the walls have moved, however imperceptibly, breathing. There are passages where condensation runs like tears. Thin rivulets trace the carvings of long-gone masons, washing names into abstraction. Stalactites form slowly in the dark, dripping calcium onto the floor to meet rising stalagmites. In one chamber, known as La Infini, the infinite, Gutara, single drip has fallen in the same place for over 100 years. A perfect rhythm, a perfect reminder. Time lives here in form. Some cataphiles say the stone has moods, that some nights it welcomes you, widening airways, guiding your steps, and other nights it tightens, squeezes, repels. There are sections where the temperature drops inexplicably, where your breath fogs, though it shouldn't. Some have reported strange winds, gentle, directionless, and without source. These are not mere drafts. They come with a feeling of being watched, not malevolently, more like curiosity. The breathing of the stone is not just physical, it's historical. Every block, every ceiling crack bears the weight of centuries. The bones are part of it, yes, but so are the engravings of miners, the candle burn marks of cataphiles, the sealed gates, the scuffed bootprints that never fade. The catacombs are not simply filled with the dead, they are shaped by the living, by every trespass, every footfall, every whisper that dares disturb the stillness. Engineers above try to tame the stone. They install concrete columns, steel supports, drainage systems, and yet the limestone always reasserts itself. Slow collapses still occur. Chambers once thought secure cave in. Paths known for decades vanish overnight. The stone forgets no intrusion. It reshapes itself not out of malice, but out of purpose. It does not serve the city. It exists beneath it, patient, unmoved. Poets have long written about the breathing of the catacombs, describing them as a subterranean lung exhaling history. In truth, the metaphor is more accurate than it seems. For every breath taken above, there is a stillness below, a counterpoint. The catacombs are not alive in the way flesh is alive, but they possess the same slow persistence. They pulse with memory. They sweat with time. They draw in the presence of the living and release the weight of the past. And perhaps this is why those who venture into the catacombs often return, change, not haunted, not cursed, but quieter, more attuned, more aware of weight. Because they have felt the stone breathe. They have walked through lungs of memory. And once you've done that, the city above never feels quite the same again. The catacombs were not meant to be mapped. That was the first lesson every underground cartographer learned, usually too late. The tunnels change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but subtly, constantly. A shift in pressure causes a ceiling to drop by inches. A flood erases chalk marks. A tunnel, once traversable, fills with debris or is bricked off by unseen hands. Maps lie. Or rather, they age out of truth before the ink even dries. Still, some try. Over the centuries, a small breed of obsessives emerged, amateurs and professionals alike, who believed they could master the maze. These cartographers descended not for glory or thrill, but for order. They brought with them notebooks, rulers, plumb lines, and candles by the dozen. They sketched every turn, measured every vault, numbered every chamber they dared enter. The deeper they went, the more they believed that if they just charted enough, the catacombs would finally submit to logic. They never did. One of the earliest was Charles Axel Guillemot, the first inspector of quarries, appointed in the 1770s after the Rue d'Enfer collapse. He spent years beneath the city, documenting what lay below. His maps were precise, beautiful, etched by hand, annotated with care. Thanks to him, parts of Paris were stabilized. Yet, despite his methodical efforts, he was always behind. By the time a map was finished, the tunnels had shifted again. Guillemot died, still drawing. Later maps grew more ambitious and more delusional. Some were made by cataphiles, passed in whispers, copied in notebooks, or on rolls of paper wrapped in plastic to survive the damp. These maps bore strange names: the serpent's spine, the labyrinth of teeth, the hall of endless breath, part orientation, part myth. They included not just directions, but warnings. Do not follow this line past the third bend, unless you know the song. This door opens only once. Some swore by them. Others swore they led explorers astray on purpose. The curse of the cartographer is not death, it's doubt. The deeper one maps, the less certain anything becomes. Tunnels loop unexpectedly, distances warp. A route measured at 30 meters might stretch into 60. Compass needles spin. GPS fails entirely. One infamous map, copied endlessly since the 1980s, contains a tunnel marked simply, "You are not here." Whether it's a joke or a warning remains unknown. Some maps are traps, decoys left by pranksters or by older cataphiles defending their secrets. One hand-drawn scroll found in a sealed crawlspace seemed detailed until followed only for it to lead explorers in a tight circle that ended in a collapsed shaft. At the bottom was another note. Now you know. The digital age brought new attempts: LiDAR scans, underground drones, 3D modeling. And while these technologies yielded impressive images, they failed in the way that mattered most. They could not capture the feeling, the warmth of a candle against the cold stone, the silence so deep it rings, the sense, irrational but undeniable, that something is watching. A map can show walls. It cannot show dread. Still, the work continues. Cataphiles. These maps are not published. They are inherited, traded, earned. To receive one is to be trusted. To alter one is to become part of the lineage. Each bearer leaves a mark, a new symbol, a footnote, a cautionary phrase. Low ceiling, belly crawl. Do not panic. The catacombs, for their part, remain unmoved by these efforts. They are not mazes. They are not puzzles to be solved. They are scars in stone, long, winding, unfinished. To map them is to try to contain memory, to impose order on something shaped by chaos and time. The maps help, yes, but only if you know their limits. And those who know the most about navigating the catacombs often walk without maps at all. They close their eyes, listen to the breathing stone, follow the cold and the silence and the sound of their own careful steps. Because, in the end, the map is never more than a suggestion. The catacombs write the story. The cartographer only tries to read it. Not all who enter the catacombs do so in search of thrill or meaning. Some go because they feel called, not by voice, but by silence. These are the catacomb keepers, not a formal society, not listed or named, but known nonetheless. They are the quiet caretakers of the dark. They do not claim ownership, but they act with reverence. The catacombs, for them, are not a challenge to conquer. They are a legacy to maintain. These keepers are often invisible. You may pass their work without realizing it. A corridor newly cleared of debris, a candlelit skull adjusted to sit upright again, graffiti scrubbed from a wall. Their tools are modest brushes, cloths, ropes, chalk, sometimes nothing more than bare hands and memory. They leave no initials. They do not document their actions online. They work not for credit, but for continuity. Many of them are older cataphiles veterans of decades underground. They've mapped the changes, survived collapses, found and sealed dangerous shafts. Some were once vandals themselves, who returned later with remorse. Others came in mourning, looking for peace, and stayed. They walk the tunnels with the same rhythm as the water through the stone, slow, certain, persistent. The tunnels know them, and they, in turn, know the tunnels like few ever have. There are stories of keepers, intervening unseen. A lost explorer finds a lit candle at a junction that wasn't burning moments before. A first-time trespasser turns a corner and finds a message in fresh chalk, this way out. No one ever sees the hand that wrote it. Sometimes, in the deeper sections, a whisper, "Don't go there." The voice, calm, firm, and gone as quickly as it came. Whether these are myths or acts of human compassion cloaked in shadow, the effect is the same. The catacombs watch their own. The keepers are not lawless. They do not challenge the city's right to enforce limits, but they believe there is a higher ethic at play. Respect for the dead, for the space, for the memory embedded in the stone. They fix what they can. They document the movement of water. They leave offerings, flowers, candles, notes to the lost. They mark dangerous tunnels and keep open the safe ones. Their presence is invisible maintenance. Some leave books behind, hidden in sealed alcoves or waterproof boxes. Poetry, journals, sketchbooks, catacomb libraries. Their content is intimate, never indexed. Some are never opened. But the act of leaving them is the point. A way of placing memory in the care of the earth, knowing that it may never be read. That perhaps the catacombs are not only a resting place for bones, but also for thoughts too fragile to survive the noise of the surface world. There have been conflicts. When the city seals entrances, the keepers sometimes reopen them not to encourage reckless access, but to preserve sacred paths. When vandalism occurs, bones rearranged, walls defaced, they clean, quietly, without protest. Their justice is not loud, it is constant. Their resistance is a candle lit again and again. Their protest is a corridor swept bare. To be a catacomb keeper is to accept obscurity. There are no medals, no recognition. Most will be forgotten, their contributions folded into the silence. But this, too, is fitting. The catacombs are a place of anonymity. The keeper's reward is knowing they helped the tunnels breathe a little longer, that they kept the balance between reverence and ruin. And when they daimony hope to have their ashes left in the catacombs, hidden away, added to the empire without a sound, not as transgressors, but as caretakers, not as tourists, but as stewards, part of the lineage of silence. You may walk past the work of a keeper and never know it. But if you ever feel that the darkness down there is less heavy than it should be, if a chamber seems unexpectedly at peace, or a path more navigable than expected it, may be because someone came before you, quietly, with purpose, and left it better than they found it. The catacombs are not haunted in the way horror stories would have you believe. There are no chains dragging across the stone, no wailing ghosts rising from bone piles. But ask anyone who's walked the deeper tunnels alone, and they'll tell you something lingers. Not a presence exactly, but a pressure. Not a sound, but the memory of sound. The catacombs hold more than the dead. They hold the echoes of everything that has ever passed through them. Some echoes are physical reverberations bouncing off curved stone, a whisper traveling farther than it should. Others seem less explainable. Voices with no source, footsteps that don't belong to you, a sudden drop in temperature, like a breath brushing your skin, the flicker of a shadow that disappears before the eye can fix on it. These are not proof of the supernatural, but they are unsettling. They unsettle not because they threaten, but because they remind you how much you do not know. Many cataphiles refuse to speak of ghosts. They say it invites madness. They speak instead of resonances. That when you walk where thousands of others have walked, when you pass through the tunnels that once carried the bones of 2 million souls, you begin to feel their weight not just physically, but psychically. Some believe that the stone remembers, that it absorbs memory the way it absorbs moisture, slowly, reluctantly, completely. The most common story involves the voice at the split. In a certain tunnel, no one agrees on which there is a fork. If you take the wrong path, you'll hear a voice behind you, gentle and close, say only one word, Nan, nothing else. It does not shout, it does not beg, just a single syllable, spoken plainly. Many who've heard it claim it saved their lives, leading them back from unstable ground or a collapsed shaft. Others say it led them deeper, and they never found the fork again. There are apparitions, too, not of people, but of light, a flickering ahead that vanishes when pursued, a glow beneath the surface of standing water, the momentary illusion of candles far down a sealed corridor. Skeptics blame tricks of the eye, reflections, fatigue. But in a place without windows or clocks, where night is eternal and the mind bends around silence, even disbelief wears thin. Some sightings defy even those explanations. A man in an 18th century cloak scene, walking a straight path, then vanishing at a solid wall. A girl humming, her bare feet echoing on dry stone. A shape watching from the bone galleries, never moving, but never entirely gone. These stories persist not because they're verified, but because they are felt. They are told in whispers among those who've seen too much to laugh and too little to swear by. The strangest phenomenon is the sound of music, faint, distant, undeniably real. A violin sometimes, an organ. Once, someone claimed to hear a full choir singing Latin liturgy. The sounds come from nowhere. They stop abruptly. They are always beautiful, and always wrong, in that they have no business existing in tunnels, meant only for silence. Scientists, when consulted, cite natural explanations, auditory pareidolia, stress hallucinations, echo anomalies, and they may be right, but even they admit that the catacombs' acoustics are unique. Sound can travel in strange loops, bounce for hundreds of meters, split and return in fragments. In such a space, you are never entirely sure whether you are hearing the present or the past. Still, many choose to believe, not in ghosts necessarily, but in imprints, that some places hold emotions like stone holds heat, that grief, joy, terror, and reverence can leave behind more than memory, that in a tunnel walked by the condemned, their final thoughts might echo forever, too soft to hear but impossible to ignore. And when you stand there lone, flashlight off, breath quiet, you understand. It is not that the catacombs are haunted. It's that they are inhabited by time, by story, by the reverberations of every soul that has ever moved through them. They do not rise to speak. They do not chase. They do not scream. They echo. And in that echo, you are reminded, you are not the first. You will not be the last. You are just passing through. Beneath Paris, the light of the city does not reach. The noise of traffic, the chiming of cafe glasses, the laughter echoing through Montmartre, none of it touches the catacombs. Down here, the rhythms are different, older, slower, the drip of water, the groan of settling stones, the whisper of air moving through an unseen vent, and beneath all of it, silence, the kind of silence that speaks. To walk the catacombs is to walk through memory, not your own, but something deeper. It is a place where the past is not gone, but layered, where bones are not remains, but structure, where death is not an ending, but a material. In this empire of the dead, death was the quarry, and memory the mortar. The walls do not hold back the world. They are the world, remade in reverence and necessity. It is easy, above ground, to forget the weight of time. Cities blur it, noise conceals it, but down here, time slows. Not metaphorically, viscerally. You feel it in your lungs, in your joints, in the way your eyes strain to find shapes in the dark. Every step feels older than the last. Every chamber echoes with more than sound. It echoes with presence. A crowd that does not move, yet fills every space. And yet, there is peace here. The catacombs are not grim. They are not grotesque. They are orderly, patient, strange. Yes, but not malicious. You feel watched, but not judged. Surrounded, but not threatened. The bones do not accuse. They rest, quietly, endlessly. They remind you that death too can be beautiful, that silence can be sacred, that the end of a life does not erase its shape. Visitors often speak of the moment they emerge back into daylight, into the clamor of Paris. Everything seems brighter, louder, flimsy. The streets feel like a surface over something real. The laughter of strangers, the glint of shop windows, the speed of passing cars, all of it feels weightless, as if the city floats on memory, barely tethered to the stone that holds it. This, perhaps, is the true legacy of the catacombs. Not fear, not fascination, but perspective. They are a mirror tilted downward, a reminder that below every triumph there is cost, below every city a grave. That time builds up and up and up, but always from bones. That beneath the monuments and museums, the politics and poems, there is only stone and silence and the soft architecture of the dead. The catacombs will outlast all of us, not as a museum, perhaps, not as a tourist attraction, but as a presence, as a breath beneath the surface. Paris will change. It always does. New buildings will rise, old ones will fall. But below, the catacombs will continue gathering dust, shedding fragments, remembering everything we forget. In the end, the empire of the dead is not just about death. It is about memory, about continuity, about what remains when nothing else does. And though you may never return, and though the bones may never speak, a part of you stays behind. A footstep, a breath, a glance down a tunnel you did not take. The catacombs, remember. And that is the final truth of them. Beneath Paris, beneath the light, beneath the noise and motion and color, there is a stillness that watches, that waits, that endures. You were here, you were seen, and now you are part of the story, too, beneath forever.